So ask yourself the question, people who know you, would they know you as someone who trusts God, who obeys God, someone who attempts to walk in His will? Or do they just know you as a person who sort of just does whatever comes naturally, and you want to be happy and you want to be successful and you want to fit into the ways of the world? God did not allow you to be born just to do any old thing you wanted to do. That wasn't His plan.
Watch carefully as the Apostle John defines darkness in his context. Darkness comes in a lot of different ways, but what John's talking about here is understanding the work of the Holy Spirit in your life. If you will acknowledge that work and agree with what the Holy Ghost is doing in your life, you won't walk in darkness.
Welcome to Diggin' Deeper, a simple Bible study where we go digging deeper into the Word of God. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Billy Ray Parrish. And today's study will take place in Genesis chapter 41. After this study, we will only have 9 more chapters before we are complete with the first book of the Bible. This is very exciting. The book of Genesis is a very hard-hitting book and can be difficult to understand. And this is one reason why we have these studies. We want to go deeper than just each verse because we want to fully understand the verse and its context. Chapter 39 continued telling the story of Joseph. The story of Joseph is continuing to be told as Joseph has come onto the scene in a very dramatic and sincere way. Going back to chapter 38, the main character was Judah, Joseph's brother, and in chapter 37 wanted to kill Joseph. As up to this point in history, Judah had yet done anything to separate himself from the rest of his brothers. Genesis chapter 9 focuses on Joseph and his hero-like journey. And Genesis chapter 40 illustrates how Joseph will go from prison to the next stage of his life. Genesis chapter 41 is made up of 57 verses beginning with verse 1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and, behold, he stood by the river. And, behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And, behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored, and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept, and dreamed the second time, and, behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And, behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and, behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker, and we dreamed a dream in one night, and we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself, and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee, that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and, behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored. And they fed in a meadow, and, behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor, and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness, and the lean. And the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine, and when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them. But they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. So I awoke, and I saw in my dream, and, behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk full, and good, and, behold, 7 ears withered thin, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them, and the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God has shewed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do he sheweth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine. And all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine shall consume the land, and the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, it is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God has shewed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house. And according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck, and he made him to ride in the 2nd chariot which he had and they cried before him, Bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath the daughter of Potiphar priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years, which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath the daughter of Potiphar a priest of On bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God, said he, hath made me forget all my toil, and all my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. 2 years have passed since the Pharaoh freed the cupbearer and restored his life, and executed the baker by execution of hanging. From chapter 40 to chapter 41, 2 years has passed by. And the Pharaoh himself has a dream. Pharaoh's dream had him standing by the Nile River. Then out of the river come 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then another 7 cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. Research reveals that the 2 Hebrew phrases used here can literally be interpreted as terrible looking and thin of flesh. It was a life-like experience, and while it was a dream, it was also a message from God. Pharaoh wakes up and knows that the experience was not just a random event, and was troubled by it. After falling asleep, he has another dream. This time, he saw 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. The King James Version, which we typically use here on Diggin' Deeper, uses the word corn instead of grain, but during this period of history, corn did not exist. This does not mean that it's an error, but an example of how language can change things. As in the first dream, there were 7 cows, and another 7 came forth. Here, there are 7 crops of grain, or corn, and then another 7 ears thin and blighted by the east wind, so it appears the second set of 7 grain heads seen by Pharaoh look like they've been parched and ruined by this blasting desert wind. Pharaoh's actions let us know that he knows something about the dreams we're troubling. And if the dreams were more than just dreams, ruined crops could be catastrophic. Before he wakes up, he sees the 7 thin heads devour the 7 plump and full heads. What could this mean for Pharaoh? Pharaoh was uncertain and troubled by the dreams, so he sent forward for anyone who could help, including magicians and advisors or wise men. He knew something wasn't right and wanted to understand what. During ancient cultures such as Egypt, there existed a lot of false traditions like medicines, spiritism, and mysticism mixed with religion as methods to reach the divine. In the previous chapter, Joseph had said that knowledge of dreams belonged to God. And while Pharaoh knew something was not right, he did not have the knowledge to go to God to interpret these dreams. The ways in which he went about interpreting the dreams were unable to reveal deeper knowledge and meaning, and when there was no real answer given, the cupbearer spoke up and mentioned the name of Joseph. He tells the Pharaoh of his experience when he and the baker were thrown into jail, and had dreams that confused them both, but Joseph had accurately interpreted them. Pharaoh had to be impressed by this. And while we are unsure whether he believed the cupbearer completely, he was desperate, so he sent for Joseph. The old saying, desperate times call for desperate measure. And while the other methods had failed, perhaps Joseph can be of assistance. We are not told, but maybe Pharaoh trusted this man and sent for Joseph without hesitation. Although the cupbearer did mention Joseph's name to Pharaoh. It took him 2 years to do so, and when Pharaoh sent for Joseph, he shaved and changed his clothes and came in unto Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells Joseph that he has a dream and needs an interpret, but nobody can do so. But he has heard of the good works from Joseph. But Joseph responds that it's God, not him, that can give a good answer. Pharaoh tells Joseph the dreams that he had and the visions that he saw. Joseph listens and responds. The dream of Pharaoh is one. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. Or God means to show Pharaoh exactly what he is about to do on the earth. Joseph further explains the 7 thin cows and 7 thin heads of grain represent a second time period, one of famine. This shortage will be so severe that it will entirely undo the 7 years of abundance. And while this may not be good news whatsoever, the situation can turn dire really quick. There is hope, as Pharaoh knows, so he can act accordingly. There will be good times and bad times, as 7 years of prosperity will be upon the land, but followed by 7 years of famine. The famine will be horrendous, as it will devastate and consume the land of Egypt. The situation will be so bad that all the good that had been experienced prior will be forgotten. And because Pharaoh had 2 dreams, these events will come to pass, and quickly. The events were fixed, and there's no reversing the decisions. Joseph does inform the Pharaoh that he needed to put together a team of wise and discerning men to manage the crisis that will fall upon the land, and he does. Joseph informs them to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. This should serve to us as a lesson to be prepared for bad times, as an emergency is not beneath any of us, and Joseph was teaching the Pharaoh and his people to be prepared for what was about to come. The food collected during the good times will serve as reserves during the bad times. While Pharaoh may not have liked hearing what was to come, he took Joseph's advice and did what was instructed, asking if there was anyone else in the land that was filled with God. When Pharaoh refers to Joseph as a man like this, he's not being condescending or belittling Joseph, but he understands that Joseph is full of knowledge and full of God's Spirit. Pharaoh goes as far in saying to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou." Here, Pharaoh appoints Joseph to be his second in command over all of Egypt. Think about how quick things had changed for Joseph. He woke up in the morning in prison, after 2 years of interpreting dreams for 2 men. And now, he's being summoned to interpret dreams for the Pharaoh. And then, being made second in command. When God says the time is right, nobody can stop what is coming, which was true for what would hit Egypt, and for each individual striving for God's plan. Pharaoh repeat his plans for Joseph, and repeating something more than once was an indication of importance, to illustrate to Joseph the changing of status. And his token of appreciation, Pharaoh hands over his signet ring as well as fine clothes and a gold chain. His life has truly changed. Joseph was not only dressing differently, as a high-ranking official in Egypt was expected to look a certain way, but he was also traveling differently, as he was riding in one of Pharaoh's chariots. Pharaoh addresses just how much authority Joseph has, explaining, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Joseph has his name changed and is given a wife from Pharaoh. His name was changed to Zaphnath-Paneah, And he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. This may have been the same Potiphar who Joseph worked for and later arrested Joseph. There is a lot of research that indicates this may be the same guy, but we are not sure as his whereabouts after Genesis chapter 39. The name change has been discussed, and while there is not a consensus about the name, it translates to something similar to someone that God speaks to or a revealer of secrets. When all of this happens, Joseph was 30 years old, which means from the time he was arrested and imprisoned, and this list of events, 13 years had passed. Joseph leaves Egypt, and the 7 years of prosperity does occur. And he collects the food as he instructed. The Bible tells us that Joseph gathered up and stored as much food as the sand of the sea. That's truly a lot. Before the famine hit, Joseph had 2 children from Asenath. The firstborn Manasseh, translating as God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. And the second Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, as God had informed Joseph. The 7 years of prosperity would end and the famine would hit. It did. But when it did, there was bread in Egypt. The people cried for bread during this famine, and Pharaoh told the people to go to Joseph and do as he instructed them. Pharaoh had complete confidence in Joseph. Despite the measure of collecting money through taxes, the Egyptians did not starve and had food to eat during this trying time. The famine was a worldwide event, and people from all over came to Egypt to buy from Joseph. And this would increase Egypt greatly, which seemed to happen to anything and everything Joseph touched. Spurgeon writes in regards to Genesis chapter 41, verses 1 through 7. Pharaoh's nightmare has too often been my waking experience. My days of laziness have ruinously destroyed all that I had achieved in times of zealous industry. My seasons of coldness have frozen all the genial glow of my periods of fervency and enthusiasm, and my fits of worldliness have thrown me back from my advances in the divine life. I needed to beware of lean prayers, lean praises, lean duties, and lean experiences, because these will eat up the fat of my comfort and peace. If I neglect prayer for ever so short a time, I lose all the spirituality to which I had attained. If I draw no fresh supplies from heaven, the old corn in my granary is soon consumed by the famine that rages in my soul. When the caterpillars of indifference, or worldliness, or self-indulgence, completely desolate my heart, and make my soul languish, then all my former fruitfulness and growth in grace avails me nothing whatsoever. How anxious should I be to have no lean flesh days, no ill-favored hours. If every day I journeyed towards the goal of my desires, I would soon reach it. But backsliding leaves me still far away from the prize of my high calling. It robs me of the advances which I had so laboriously made. The only way in which all my days can be like the sleek, fat cows is to keep feeding them in the right meadow, to keep spending them with the Lord, in His service, in His company, in His fear, and in His way. Why should not every year be richer than the past, in love, and usefulness, and joy? I am closer to the celestial hills. I have had more experience of my Lord, and I should be more like Him. O Lord, keep far from me the curse of leanness of soul. Do not let me have to cry my leanness. My leanness, woe unto me! But may I be well fed and nourished in your house, that I may praise your name. And this is where we will end, as we have reached the end of our Bible study today for Genesis chapter 41. We only have 10 more chapters left before we have finished the first book of the Bible. We have discussed many historical events, so stay tuned for what's to come next. There is no telling what the next studies will reveal, so join us next time for our Bible study. Here on Digging Deeper, as we simply dig deeper into the Word of God. If you liked what you just watched, like and share our content. It really helps us grow. And think about subscribing to our channel, which will help you keep up to date with all of our content. Once again, I am your host, Billy Ray Parrish. And until next time, thank you for joining us. Stay safe and God bless.